A long time, probably 22 years now, anywhere from the analytics side to the consulting side, even as a CIO, and understanding those challenges of the amount of data we have. But one of the things I always pose the question to everyone is, it's interesting we call it big data, and big data bothers me because it doesn't describe a problem or a solution, it just is, right? And the challenge with that is that if you go back 20 years ago, we had big data problems then. And that's, you saw your ERP systems being developed. Matter of fact, some of your spreadsheets are just because of that point. So this is a great topic. There's a lot to it. And one of the things we want to do with the panel is give you some insight of how some of your peers are working with big data and solving some of the challenges they face today. So I'd like to introduce Nate Arnold. He's the CIO, Global Technology and Security at GE Transportation. Nate is the CIO for, in his role, he's responsible for implementing tools and processes that help optimize the delivery of the world-class global engineering organization. He's also responsible for defining and enforcing the cybersecurity strategies that protect business-critical data assets. The next panelist is Marshall Usher. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Usher. Marshall leads numerous business improvement initiatives over the last 17 years as a career program manager, and in his current role as the supply chain business development executive for Rolls-Royce Energy Systems. He's worked on big data initiatives deploying and implementing program management and supply chain systems in the construction, aerospace, and energy industries. Marshall was elected president of the Hyphen Solutions user group, encompassing 200 plus companies and more than 12,000 users of construction management software, and was recognized with a Construtech Gold Vision Award for a national rollout of the Hyphen Build Pro and Supply Pro systems. And we have Jim Lekowitz, that's the CIO for Ritter Technology, a hydraulics and pneumatics part distributor established in Pittsburgh since 1953. He's responsible for all internal computer system works, definition, and support. He provides management for services for all Ritter offices, as well as collated servers, system security, Salesforce.com, CRM, EDI, and ERP systems design and planning. Jim was born on the north side of Pittsburgh and has never left. Graduated from the University of Pittsburgh with a BS in computer science, and he's been part of the Ritter team since 2008. So thank you for joining us, and now we get to grill you on how you handle big data projects. So, one of the things is there's a lot of discussion about structured and unstructured data and the acquisition of that data. And can you give us some creative examples of how your company acquires some of this data and how you're utilizing that? I don't know, Jim, you want to start, or?
We actually acquire some of our data right now. I'm kind of the small one of this group here. Both of these gentlemen are large companies. We're a little local $70 million distribution company here in Pittsburgh. And a bulk of the data that we have comes from a system that we use from our major vendor, which is Parker Hannifin. They have a hose tracking system. It's called the PTS system, which allows us to capture data that customers of ours enter directly into this system to track hoses, hydraulic hoses and assemblies that are on pieces of equipment that are scattered all throughout plants, pieces of mobile equipment, and repair services that they may put together, which we then take and then integrate into our system so that we can go ahead and mine that data for both product sales and for maintenance and service support.
Marshall?
So Rolls-Royce Energy being a project-based business where we'll take a jet engine, bolt it to a compressor or a generator, and then provide power generation solutions or compression solutions to some of the not-so-friendly tourist destinations of the world. The way that we wanted to really try and leverage our data was pulling production information and supply chain information from SAP, aggregating that with some of the scheduling performance data from our enterprise planning and resources system, and then trying to integrate those with some of the other program management pieces of data around risk, action, so on and so forth. So traditionally, our program managers and field service representatives would have to access different systems to get their to answer customer questions. And oftentimes, whenever you're in the jungles of Nigeria or some of the backwoods of China, that's a little bit tough to get to. So what we've been able to do is partner with Savior Technologies here in Pittsburgh to pull that information from SAP, from our enterprise planning and resources system, to make a web-based application that allows our FSRs and our PMs to access that data pretty much on the fly from anywhere in the world. So it's really been about, it's more around, whenever you look at the 5 V's of big data, our challenge was really around the variety and velocity, and less around, the actual size of the data sets themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for GE, and I'm specifically from the transportation unit, but obviously GE has multiple industrial segments. I think Saman's slide that showed the sources of data explains, what we're going after very well. So it was this kind of half circle slide that showed data coming from business systems, then from humans, then from machines, right? So we're clearly, from an industrial standpoint, in that outer blue arc of machine connectivity. And that's a lot of what you'll hear from, some of my examples today, and my colleague John Demalis is speaking this afternoon, specifically around some of our software. But in terms of acquiring data, it's really about connecting to those machines. So we have a tremendous installed base of not only locomotives in the case of the transportation business, but aircraft engines in the case of our aviation business, power generation systems, turbines around the world. So it's a lot for us around sensor technology. It starts there. We have the benefit of having a number of these applications that already have control systems embedded. We've been working in software for a long time, but it's been local contained software within those assets. And so for us, it's really about, okay, how do we get sensors on those assets? How do we connect those assets globally in some, again, similar situation where I've got a locomotive in a remote territory in the United States, in the Northwest, where we don't necessarily have strong cell coverage. How do I get that information, then connect it back and tie it into enterprise systems and tie it into customer systems? So a lot of what we're doing is external, right? So it's not even as much of enabling and optimizing our own assets, but it's working with customer data to then try to make sure that the application of that asset is optimized for their use. So a lot of sensor, a lot of connectivity.
Can you elaborate a little more? 2 parts. One is just the sheer volume. So again, for machine data that generates lots of information or data at an alarming rate. But second of all is, how are you leveraging, you touched briefly on this about leveraging partner, but are you working on plans on assimilating some of acquiring data from external sources and then integrating some of the data back to them? Is there those partnerships? Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. So in our case, in terms of connecting with external systems, the business model for our corporation really has changed. So it's not, even a decade ago, we went from just selling assets, just making these big pieces of equipment and selling them, to really focusing on service, because we realized we had a tremendous installed base, and that was really what was driving value for our customer, was to optimize what was already there. And now with big data and with connectivity, we've really shifted into a new space of optimizing outcomes for our customers. So in order to do that, we really have to understand the customer, what's meaningful for them, what metrics drive success for their business. So yeah, absolutely. We have to really be clear, in our case for locomotives, that velocity is what counts. Velocity is what makes or breaks the success of a locomotive, a railroad company. So from our standpoint, we have to understand, how do they measure that today? What are their challenges in that space for velocity? What are the critical X's that drive hardships to achieve velocity? And to do that, we have to be, our sales cycle is a lot different than it was before. It wasn't just showing the new features of a locomotive. It's really understanding, where are your pain points, how can we contribute to both monitoring those more effectively and also impacting them for you. So you see a lot more of our CIOs of our businesses engaged in the commercial process, talking to CIOs of the companies that we're working to sell to understand what are their enterprise systems, what are the data, attributes that we can have access to. Gets into a little bit of the privacy and ownership of data as well. That is part of the negotiation for a sale now. So yeah, we try to integrate as deep as we can into the customer, into their enterprise resource planning systems as well, to know where we can make a difference with our products.
Jim, do you have any insight from your organization?
Yeah, in our case, again, we're trying to leverage where can we provide product the best for the customer. Through the data collection that we're doing, it allows us to analyze for them and determine what products can we put in a mix in there. And then how can we help them keep and be proactive on maintenance on their services? How are they keeping their equipment alive based on the information that we're bringing back? And how quickly can we turn around and provide to them product that's going to allow them to keep their uptime on their machines and their overall operational efficiency at a high level. And that's been kind of a challenge for us in this particular industry because, again, a lot of our products go on dirty old hydraulic pumps and motors and things like that that are buried in the basement of factories. The tracking system that we're using right now allows us to grab some of that information, pull that back, supply to the sales teams, and allow also our inside salespeople when they call in to be able to make suggestions to try to help them out. And that's just been one of the things that we've been struggling with lately. And with help from our local folks, Xavier, they've allowed integration with some of that data coming back into another portion of a system that we use, which is Salesforce.com, to present information directly to the inside salespeople as well as our mobile staff to have that information at their fingertips so they can make the proper decisions and make the proper suggestions to the customers to help grow the business.
So really, just kind of building on some of the two themes that these gentlemen just talked about, it's all about creating the right customer outcome. And, again, for us, it really comes down to the speed of information. As Rolls-Royce is part of a larger project, we really owe our customers, who is the integrator of that program, to make sure that we can provide them with the most up-to-date information on equipment availability, on staffing levels and resource availability, so on and so forth. So the faster that we can understand, A, are we going to have the right amount of people with the right skill set and be able to have that equipment on site whenever it's expected and when it's needed. But most importantly, if it's not going to be there, that has a very high impact on the overall project success. So really, it's about making sure that we understand what resources we have available. How do we make sure that we can quickly react if those resources aren't available, and really minimize the impact to the overall customer program. And I think being able to aggregate this data and make it available real time has really been one of the big drivers over the last couple of years in the increasing levels of customer satisfaction that we've seen.
Have any of you had any experience with actually monetizing this data where it actually creates value, or you can actually profit from the data that you've collected, aggregating that and making it useful information?
Yeah, well, again, in our case, we're trying to use the data to drive sales for the company. How can we go ahead and optimize what we're doing? One of the things by getting this data back together has also allowed us to turn around and take a look at what inventories are we carrying. One of the big problems that we have is carrying cost of a lot of inventory due to, if I simply explain hose, if you think in a simple phase, it's just like what you'd have at home in your garden hose. You got some kind of a material hose in between, you got connectors on both ends. But in our particular case, the connectors can be anything from US through metric, through all various sizes, pressures, things like that. So our inventories, our SKUs that we have in stock, are in certain cases scattered across our various warehouses, hundreds of thousands of units. And the problem that you have is a lot of these are rather expensive. So by taking a look at this, it's helped us reduce what we're actually carrying on hand. So that's minimizing our capital outlay that we have. And then on the opposite side, if we can turn around then and also keep the right inventory on hand when someone's looking for a product, it's something that we can go ahead and deliver to them quickly, rapidly, because part of our business and our competition is, who has it today? Most of the customers aren't going to be afraid to turn around and walk to a competitor down the road if they've got the same product. So how do we optimize that particular product and carrying those in hand so that we have it available, and in certain cases we may be able to charge a premium for it. So again, now we can go ahead and find out that that's generating revenue for us.
Nate, I was going to ask you the same question. I would think that it'd be important to, from the business perspective, to find, there's not only the profitability and performance that you get out of predictive analytics or better analytics, but have your company looked at ways of being able to take and monetize that information and reselling that, or again, anything you can elaborate on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say in all of our divisions now, with our focus on data and analytics, we have examples where we have both a capital proposal and an optimization proposal when we go commercially to the customer. And again, traditionally, the capital proposal has just been buy our newest locomotive and you'll be happy. But customers are asking for more, right? That's not good enough. It just isn't enough capacity to just buy more of stuff and have it be meaningful to them. So the optimization proposals are what we're monetizing today, and those are only made possible with data and with analytics. We have to be smart enough to be able to represent how our asset is going to contribute in their ecosystem, right? And what attributes of our asset is going to really contribute and move their bottom line. And what are the supplementary software analytic capabilities that we can provide that our competitors cannot, that are really going to move the needle for your business. So our competition has shifted from just the capital industrial businesses to the SAPs, the IBMs of the world, right? The Accentures of the world, because they're working to help figure out what does that data mean to you, Norfolk Southern, and how can you use it to really get outcomes for yourself. And our value proposition is, look, nobody knows our asset better than we do. We build it, right? Nobody can access the information about that asset better than we can. Where we had a gap was in that optimization and the analytics, that front-end process. So we're really focusing heavily on building software that provides measurable outcomes. And for us, the monetization is the commercial play for our customers has really changed. It's not buy more of the asset. It's buy our asset and be smarter with how you use it. And by the way, we're the best in the world at telling you how we can be smarter using our asset.
I was going to say, Marshall, you probably have a lot of experience, especially with the supply chain. There's going to be a lot of little subtle 1 or 2% going right to the bottom line if you could optimize that through analytics. So.
There is that, but I think probably the best example within Rolls-Royce is how we've been able to look at, so taking our civil aerospace group, for instance, so getting out of energy for a bit. Civil aerospace has a program called Power by the Hour. And what it allows us to do is, instead of selling the asset to the airlines, we will actually manage that asset and own that asset, and then they buy basically flight time off of Rolls-Royce. And so these next generation engines generate a lot of data. You probably heard some of it on the the Malaysian Airlines whenever the Rolls-Royce engine was sending pings to the satellites as the plane was disappearing off of the radar. So we have access to all of that information. So what we've been able to do is utilize that information to really understand where and when we would expect a engine to require maintenance and overhaul. We can look at different patterns around where that engine has been, so on and so forth, and then use that information to make sure that we've got the right parts in the right places whenever those engines are going to need to be serviced. So instead of selling the asset and generating the income and off of that initial sale, we've actually been a lot more successful in generating better returns by looking at the maintenance of that asset and less about selling the original equipment.
And I'd say it's an interesting challenge that we found, right, is the definition of ownership of data becomes a critical discussion, right? So if the customer is buying your asset, they own that. They operate it in their ecosystem. And we're coming to them saying, need to know a little bit more about how you're operating it and what some of the things, the factors that you're facing. And so it's changed. I think there's a lot smarter commercial people than I am, clearly, that work that relationship and understand, the variation of customers' willingness to give us data. But what we hold as intellectual property for us is the method of analyzing it, right? Once we have some access to that data, the intelligence that we infuse into analyzing that data and being able to predict what that data is telling us, that really becomes the intellectual property. In addition to, how we build the asset and how it actually, works for them, it's almost as important as the asset is now. And I'm sure that you face the same variation in customers' willingness to provide data or sign up for the service. It's definitely a unique challenge.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I think that's probably one of the hidden benefits of having that power by the hour type arrangement, where you're able to, basically that data is, it is still Rolls-Royce data. All of it comes into our tactical operations center in our Warwick, UK facility, operates 24/7, and then we can actually, provide that data to customers as necessary. But at the end of the day, we still own the asset, we still own the data.
I was going to ask you, we talk about performance and profitability, but it's really empowering the end user, right? Giving them the information they need to make the better decisions. So can you guys give us a little bit of examples of where you've embedded or built analytics to improve the decision-making process for the end user?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start. I'll stay in my home turf on the locomotive side because that's what I know the best. But we have an application that we call Movement Planner. And there's several variations of this. The Trip Optimizer, you can go to the website and learn more about our analytic capabilities. But in general, what this application allows us to do, so first it takes information about the asset itself. So it communicates directly with the locomotive. It understands how heavy the load we have on the consist is. It understands how fast you're traveling. It understands what's going on in the network of the rail system. And ultimately just runs an optimization algorithm and helps inform the railroad, here's how you should run that asset given all of these other factors today and at this moment in time. So it draws on a massive amount of information. And the goal really there is, again, that velocity metric, right? So any downtime, anytime I've got to pull a locomotive off onto a sidetrack to let another locomotive go past it, running the other way, is downtime for that locomotive, and it's at zero velocity, and that's bad for our railroad customers. So anytime, again, we can optimize that ecosystem for them, where they're running as much as they can, and they're getting their cargo to the destination as fast as they can, is a benefit for them. And we speak in terms of kind of the 1% effect of productivity for our customers. So if you've heard any of the Minds and Machines, Industrial Internet, talks that our chairman, Jeff Immelt's been marketing, you probably heard this concept of power 1% for GE. And for us, it's really that 1% of a velocity increase for our customer in the rail business alone is billions of dollars, right? So factor that across all the segments of GE. That's really what we're going after is, okay, how do I take applications like a Movement Planner, like a Trip Optimizer, make measurable improvements in a key output like velocity, and give them operating dollars, and how then do we monetize and get value from that by providing that service in that application.
Jim, I was going to ask you, especially in your organization, I would imagine it's really important for maintenance schedules, things like that. So what is your company doing to empower the user to be able to handle those in real time?
Yeah, ours is a little simpler than what these gentlemen have. Basically, we tend to have some algorithms that'll comb down through the reports and basically state, here's the cyclic failures that you're seeing across lots of pieces of equipment that you have, and it's taking you out for a period of time. Or we can also show them in certain cases that, you've got something really special here in place, and it's breaking, far less often than others. However, it might take us up to 3 weeks to get parts. So we can help them be proactive in their schedule at that point by saying, hey, here's your information that's noted that this particular part has been breaking on average 4 times a year. It's time to order some replacement parts or some spare parts to keep in place to do that. As well as in certain cases, we've gone back to the customers with some of the analytics that we have and send to them, we see this breaking regularly. Maybe we ought to redesign it. And you know what, we have the capacity to do that for you if you'd like. But in those cases, we can give them that type of data and show them what's going on.
Yeah, so I think while the scale might be different between Jim's business and our businesses, I think the way that we use analytics is very much the same. We look at it to optimize where we keep inventory, to make sure that whenever we do have a power system or a compression system that is going to require an overhaul, that we've got the right parts in the right place of the world at the right time. So again, it kind of gets down to the blocking and tackling of supply chain management. How long has the asset been in the field? What is the expected lifetime or mean time between failure? And then how do you make sure that you've got the right parts, where the field service reps are going to need them.
Okay. One of the things is that from the end user experience too, I would imagine that mobile has a big impact on this. So how, the bring your own device to the workforce, you got wireless connected devices all over the place, bandwidth's an issue, but maybe you can give us some examples of how you've kind of consolidated or quelled the troops to be able to give them the ability to make these decisions using mobile platforms.
Yeah, so full disclosure, mobile access is probably one of the areas where Rolls-Royce is a bit behind the times. Our CIO actually has recently left to go join another company, and he made a joke on his going away party that, he read a note from his new company, and it was talking about, your iPhone is on order. If you don't like this color, let us know. Here's your choice of carriers, so on and so forth. And he folds up the email and goes, "That's it. Lock down BlackBerries for everybody." So, I think that's probably one of the biggest opportunities we have moving forward to better leverage some of the data that, and the systems that we have. So, I talked a little bit before about how we pull all of this information from SAP, our enterprise planning systems, so on and so forth, to make that accessible. Right now, it's our mobile access platform really consists of, VPN over wireless. So, but I think moving forward, that's probably one of the bigger opportunities that we see to really extend the platform that we have today.
Well, see, for us, it's a little simpler. We're using iPhones and iPads with scanning capability that's on it within the apps that we're using. So we can go out and scan that label. In this PTS system, we generate a label for every single hose that we put out there. And that label is unique in the case that the barcode can retrieve the data and tell them, here's all the components that are in that particular hose. So at this point, a field service person can go out, scan it, and say, here it is. Do I have it all? Can I go build it, or do I got to place an order for it? And that's where, unfortunately, in that point, we don't have that integrated yet to tie back into the system. They got to get on the phone and call somebody and say, I need a part. Can you either run it down here, or can you get it on order for us? So that's kind of what we've got.
So I'll address it kind of from an acquisition and presentation standpoint. So from a presentation standpoint, we have the benefit of, over the past probably 4 or 5 years, investing over $1 billion in a new software center out in San Ramon, California. So GE placed a big bet on this, several years ago, and we're building to mobile. So the platform that we're essentially building out there, Predix platform, is geared toward presentation on mobile, and it's geared toward having a common platform, a common base of technology that allows us to have some commonality of communication across all of our businesses and assets. So it standardizes the way we collect and the way we analyze and the way we're able to present data. So from a scale standpoint, I know that's large scale, and maybe you can come talk with John's talk later about what's really going on in that stack, because I'm not smart enough to explain all of the technology there. But presentation side, I think it's important that it's designed for mobile first. I mean, there really isn't a desktop integration client server model for these applications anymore, and in fact it tends to look worse when you have to access it on a browser on a laptop. You think, man, this is silly, why are we doing that? From an acquisition standpoint, I think it's interesting. We've actually changed the design of our products. So again, locomotive, if you asked us 10 years ago, we had to refresh the antenna on the locomotive because we had a new communication technology. We've been communicating with locomotives for decades, but the pace at which we're changing out that technology and refreshing that technology has become so frequent that we've actually changed the entire design of where that communication model sits on a locomotive. So today we have, a decade ago, we'd have to drill down and cut out metal and run new cables, and it was a significant kind of retrofitting of new antenna and communication in the locomotive. Now we've got a neat little orange box that sits right on top of the cab of the locomotive that we can pop off very easily, plug and play the new communication equipment, pack it back on, and off you go. So again, it goes to that speed for the customer. The asset, the decision making, the improving has to happen very, very quickly for them so they can take advantage of that technology and move forward quickly.
Well, this leads to an interesting discussion, too, and it's probably a hotly debated one about the security of this information. So you're collecting, unstructured data coming from maybe social media, things like that in some organizations. And then you've got the personal information and some of the value that you have by aggregating this data and then trying to make some sense out of it. There's information that could be disseminated unintentionally. So maybe if you can go through a little bit about how each of you handle that security and some of the policies you have in place and what some of the challenges you face from compliance, regulatory, and just maybe even just morally not disclosing certain pieces of information. So I know that some of you in the manufacturing side, it's not probably as critical, but I imagine there's some information that could be correlated or disseminated unintentionally.
Yeah, so as far as Rolls-Royce goes, our IT management staff is pretty adamant that they've got a policy that we control all of our own data. So we don't house anything externally. Now, I think you can argue whether or not that's the right approach, and I think depending on who you ask in the business, whenever you ask the accountants versus the IT guys, it might get into a pretty good debate there. But at the end of the day, I think what it does do is provides at least a clear level of accountability for who is responsible for that data. Because while we don't use credit card numbers or personal data from our customers, I mean, we do have a lot of data around cost, so on and so forth, that we feel is pretty sensitive. So we maintain all of our own data and security in house.
Well, basically, as I guess, we're small. The security and the policy layout for our data basically sits right here. I'm the one who sets it up. I'm the one that takes care of it on our servers, and it's basically completely housed in house. We do have access with customers. They're accessing it through pretty much web communications, or like with anybody else. A lot of our business is done via email. We're sending quotes and things back and forth. So I can account for it while it's in house. When it goes outside, unfortunately, I can't. But as far as our general ERP system that we've got, again, it's on a closed network for us. Really, no one else has access to it, and that's pretty much the way that we're set up.
So for us, it's really a challenge to balance speed and rigor and controllership, right? So you've heard from my examples that this is the name of the game is speed. We've got to get the newest technology, the newest algorithms developed and available to our customers as fast as possible. So in order to be able to do that, we have to rethink how we leverage technology, even with respect to our internal system. So, we're starting to look at cloud technologies. In fact, moving significant portions of available technologies into the cloud space. And what I'd say is we're spending a lot of time on data classification. We're really trying to understand what is the data that is low risk to be in that environment. And we allow it to go in that environment. But again, we're clearly very, very aware of what our real crown jewels of intellectual property are. We segment that away from the availability of folks to access externally. And we ourselves are cautious about sharing that. And that collaboration with our customers, as much as we're asking them for data, they're sometimes asking us for data. And so it's that same approach where we have to be cautious of what we allow as well. So it's for us, I think it starts with that classification. Understand what data can be available out there. Understand what the mechanism of serving that data is when you start to move to something like the cloud. But to say we've figured that model out, I'd say I don't think we've nearly figured it out, but we're taking a cautious approach, knowing that we have to be in that game. We have to have information that's available with speed in that environment.
So when you talk about where the data, classifying the data, which I think everyone struggles with that, of not knowing what data would mean something later on. So what's intellectual property, what isn't. So you touched on this earlier about who owns the data, right? And then this brings up an interesting thing about when you talk about the cloud. Cloud complicates things a little bit of services that are available, software as a service, the Salesforce. I know we talked about that. So how are you handling, what strategies are you using today to try to handle the disparate data that exists in hybrid clouds, public clouds, private clouds, software as a service?
Yeah, I think kind of going back to what I said is that's one of the reasons I believe our IT management has said we're going to maintain everything in-house. Okay. So for us, it's really a non-issue because of those policies. But I'll defer that one to these gentlemen.
On our side, it's a balance. Again, we've got different perspectives from different customers, right? So clearly, if I go to Union Pacific or in a BNSF and say, okay, here's my locomotive optimization platform, and we want your data, and it's going to be on the same environment and server as BN's data and UP's data, they're very interested in understanding exactly how we're going to handle that data. Physically, is there separation? Logically, is there any risk that there could be any access? And that's a big challenge. And that challenge happens whether we talk about hosting that service. So am I giving you an application that we host, and I'm importing your data physically into my world? Or am I allowing you to have something that you maintain physically, and then I'm accessing with some application level information, but I'm not actually taking your data. So I don't know that we've figured out exactly which model is going to work, But in those cases, we have to be very clear in leveraging the technologies that we can to show that separation of data, because that is a key risk.
Again, ours pretty much is relatively small. We don't share the information. We don't have, unfortunately, what either of you gentlemen have with a lot of the customers. It is really only our own internal data at that point, so.
Okay. What do you, one of you had said that you were using Salesforce, though. Okay, so the data, some of the data being collected about the customers, obviously outside of your control. Assimilating that data and the security behind that is a challenge. It's like, what do you think about how you could leverage that and control that, manage it?
I really think it's something that we're still trying to figure out
Okay.
at this point. I mean, really.
Well, it's a complex issue that most of us are facing that, because more and more of the software as a service is being handled outside the organization. You can control maybe the security between the application and the environment, but at the end of the day, we still struggle with, who owns the data, how do you control that data? And then others they have access to that data too, technically, so.
I'm sure we share with Marshall, obviously there's key intellectual property that is a target by a lot of groups, nations, right? And so for us, I think our learning at scale is that we can't block everything. We can't continually just put up walls and try to prevent access. We know we're going to get infiltrated to some degree, and really the segmentation of data and understanding what they're going after. So that's where we start to really apply analytics internally. And we use technologies like Splunk to understand all of the intrusions that we get as a GE corporation. Who's coming in? What are they coming after? How do they come in? All of that goes into internal analytics that we try to digest, and that helps guide us with what we can and can't do with our data as well.
Yeah, I think both of these gentlemen hit on an interesting point around, how do you segregate that data, and what do you determine is on accessible systems to the web versus internal standalone systems that don't have access to the internet. Our defense group in Bristol, the UK, is a classic example of that. They'll have some project-based data that is available to their program managers and field service personnel, but as far as some of the designs for the lift van for the Joint Strike Fighter, for instance, that stuff is kept completely offline, so that if one of the not-so-friendly nations or entities were to penetrate that system, they still wouldn't have access to that data just simply because it's offline.
Well, I don't know. There's so many topics here we can discuss. I was wondering that maybe if there was a few questions from the audience that would like to ask something specific or clarification.
Specifically for Nate, you spoke about identifying velocity as kind of the key driver. Internally, for sort of change management, was that something that you got from win-loss? Was that something from a traditional customer engagement, or was it really data-based to convince everybody?
Yeah, I think it's two things, right? I think it's the evolution of the capability, right? So having access to more and more data and starting to be able to draw correlations of what that data means when it's together, really started to enable that conversation. So I think it originated organically within our business to be able to try to speak to the customer in terms that they care about. Again, not just selling the asset, but selling what they care about. From a change management standpoint, it's been, are you asking more internally or internally? Yeah. So internally for us, it was a hard realization to say that you're not just, we're not just a locomotive company. Our goal isn't just to sell locomotives. Our goal is to sell outcomes for our customers. And I think the transition happened a little bit with our service models, where we recognized that the internal metric wasn't just to sell as many locomotives as possible, but what it was to make sure that we were also servicing and optimizing the existing base that those customers had. So that was one step that led us to think differently about our commercial model. The next step has been that software piece. We know we can talk to these assets. We know that customers are asking us and challenging us on these actions. How do we respond to it? So it was driven by the capability and accessibility of data, and it was driven by the customers asking us to think about how to help them with that.
Anyone else? No, sir.
Wait, one second for your question. Hold on. Thank you. Questions to Mr. Marshall. You were talking about you hosting your own data and not moving to the cloud. Just wanted to know as to what are some of your concerns or challenges or decision that led to saying that we will be hosting our own data.
So really, that decision was made at a corporate level, so with Rolls-Royce PLC, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that a lot of the information that our defense group deals with, both for the UK government, the Ministry of Defense, and the US DoD, simply requires an exceptional level of security. So they felt that the cost was, and the effort, quite frankly, was worth keeping that data in-house, building that capability and expertise in-house, and not taking the risk of farming that out. And at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to, right, is a risk management decision. And whenever you look at the cost or the impact of having some of that data fall into the wrong hands, the risk just simply outweighed the cost of keeping it in-house.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I think you started to address some of this with the classification of data, but I'm wondering how you go about reusing your own data sets. Do you have repositories of data? Do you apply any metadata schema over those data to reuse them for yourselves internally?
That's a great question. So probably the biggest opportunity that we've been able to capitalize on with the project data that we store is in refining our bids. So depending on the complexity of the customer, the product offering that they're in search of, the area of the world that it's going into, we've got a pretty large data repository now that we can pull on to make sure that the bids that we're putting forth are accurate, and we're not pricing ourselves out, but we're also able to generate a fair return.
And we're pretty much in the same case. We're reviewing the data that we have, looking at what we've sold, what's happened, where have we won, where have we lost, what's going on, and we're just combing down through years and years of data. We have probably 15, 20 years worth of sales data that we've maintained out there, and we try to use that to stay in front of the market.
Yeah, we've top down almost, where we've started with the customer and tried to optimize that data set, and in doing so recognize that there were substantial opportunities to leverage that internally to help not only optimize our operations, but to reduce our cycle to our customers. So yeah, there's a ton that we try to reuse. There's a ton that we try to take in learnings from the external world back internally that really from our standpoint close the loop. Right, what are the things that we can either change on the design side of our assets or the process of creating our assets that support what we've seen to be valuable in the field. And we're very early in that process. I think there's a lot more opportunity, but yeah, it's definitely something we're trying to make value with.
Just kind of building on that a bit, I mean, that's probably one of the things that Rolls-Royce does fairly well is drive continuous improvement. So we'll be able to mine a lot of the program management data we have around risks, action items, so on and so forth, to not only refine our bids and make ourselves more competitive, but also to spot trends around particular customers, particular products, or even, quite frankly, particular individuals out in the field that may generate a significantly higher level of actions or issues, and then we can put the corrective actions in place to address those.
So you've talked a lot about how you are getting your customers' data to see how well your assets are working in their environment. Are you finding that your suppliers are asking for data of how their assets are working in your facilities, and how does that complicate issues of IP and data ownership, and does it also affect how well you judge the capability of those suppliers? Because I can see how this is beginning to change how someone looks at their providers and how good they are as to how well they're using this type of data.
Yeah, so I could take a stab at that first. The suppliers that we've seen that are really interested in that type of data sharing arrangement have really been more on the strategic supplier side. So they're suppliers that we partner with, we've got long-term agreements with. So exchanging that data back and forth hasn't really been an issue. It's really been, quite frankly, a huge benefit. Probably some of our generator suppliers are the best examples of that, where you've got a large, expensive asset that's in the field with a life cycle of 20, 30 plus years, years. And as the performance of that asset either begins to degrade or site conditions change, so on and so forth, they want to know so that they can refine their product offerings or make sure, again, kind of getting back to the supply chain aspect, that they've got the right parts in the right place at the right time. So it hasn't really been much of a challenge because I think it's been more in the space where we already have long established partnerships with these suppliers. But I mean, there's absolutely been an increase in those types of requests over the last couple of years.
Yes, yeah, it's the same thing for us. Most of our suppliers have been around with us since the company's been in existence in the 50s. And, they're more interested in trying to see, well, what products are you taking that we can shove more of them to have you buy them and put them on your shelf for you. That's really where a lot of these guys are falling. But then again, they've already kind of got that metric. And, the big thing that we get into with a lot of them is for failure repairs. Some of the cylinders and things that we put out there, that's where we do have a lot of feedback that goes back and forth. And that data is captured multiple ways. Part of it's through the tracking system. Part of it's through them requesting particular reports that my IT department will put together and supply to them. But other than that, is pretty much as Marshall has noted, since it's been such a long-term relationship, the flow of that data is pretty clean.
Yeah, on our side, I think most of our examples are as GE as the supplier, a main supplier to the customer. So that's the challenge we've been speaking to. On our supplier side, I've seen certainly capacity information, right? Again, long-term suppliers, they want visibility to our long-term demand, right? So they can do their own capacity planning because again, we have a lot of long cycle relationships with the supply base. I haven't really seen them get in myself personally into performance. I can see where they would as we connect some of our larger pieces of equipment in a factory, let's say, and I think the hesitation that we would have is exactly what we reflected with our customers. But now you're seeing the cycle times of operations for me in a facility, and that's that might be something that I'm not necessarily eager to share, right? Maybe that's a competitive advantage for me in being able to operate that. So I don't know that we've faced that challenge personally, but I know that we're sensitive to that because we've experienced it on the other side. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Other questions you want to ask?
I guess the big thing was just the volume that we're talking about here. Maybe I know everyone's dealing with various levels of volume of data they're collecting. So maybe you can give kind of an idea of how quickly the volume of data has grown in your organization in the last even 2 years.
So for us, it's less about the volume of data and more about the variety and velocity. So as the data has always been there. We get data from our SAP system, but the real challenge has been how do you pull all of that data into one system and provide it to the people that then can make intelligent decisions from it. So as far as volume, it hasn't really been an issue. It's really been more about how do you aggregate that data, how do you package it and present it in a way that allows people to make informed decisions.
Same with us. Our data is pretty steady. It's been that way ever since I've been there. It's not increased very much at all. It's the same system that we've had in place, so it's generating the same amount of data each time. But we are running across cases where, with some of the cloud items that we're looking at, where we will have data that kind of exponentially will increase over time, but for that I really don't have any particular measure on.
Now, with the capability and technology, I think we've taken the stance of collect everything, collect as much as you can, and figure out what's useful later. Because if we try to spend time predicting ourselves what data we think is meaningful, kind of defeats the purpose, right? The analytic methodology is collect it all and use tools to figure out what's meaningful. So we've really taken that approach, and it's in a commercial space where you look at maybe an aircraft engine that's sending up to 2 million tags a second of data while it's in flight. That's a volume case that we plan for, right? How do we collect that data reliably? How do we process and store that much data and enable it for analytics? And that's the really cool stuff that our techies figure out how to do for us. On the kind of supply side, when we talk about trying to build a concept of a brilliant factory or a smarter factory, again, we have to balance the acquisition of data with the impact on the shop. So we can't always automate data capture in big industrial company like GE, because we do a lot of manual work on these pieces of machinery, And if I'm asking those shops to collect a lot of data for me to now be able to analyze and make their shops more productive, I'm inherently making them less productive because I'm asking them to collect data. So we're in that balance, that challenge right now where we're saying, okay, well, what data do you really want? Well, you can't ask every operator to come off the line and put in all this data because now they're not productive. But no, trust us, we're going to come back and give you some algorithms that are going to make you a lot more productive. I think we find our way, we find a course that's mutually beneficial, but it is a challenge in that side on the manufacturing front to kind of balance acquiring data in a large discrete manufacturing world, with the capability to analyze that for productivity.
Good. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. And
Thank you.
yeah. All right.